Friends, we are honored today to be joined by Professor Ed Roberts of MIT. Ed Roberts is the faculty member who is responsible for spearheading the entrepreneurship curriculum at MIT, which I find very interesting because just a couple of days ago, I received an email asking the provocative headline, "Can entrepreneurship be taught?" Well, as any student who attends MIT knows, it's now one of the core pillars of the MIT educational experience, of the, I believe, 5 pillars of what's being taught at the school. And a lot of that is due to the very person we're talking with today. Professor Roberts, in addition to founding and spearheading the entrepreneurship curriculum, is also responsible for the entrepreneurship report, which attempted to quantify and catalog a lot of the entrepreneurial activity coming out of the school, and found, among other things, that if the aggregate net worth of all the startups that came out of MIT were ranked as a country, it would be, at the time, I think it was 11th, and that was before big success stories like Okta and PillPack. So I don't know if that's been updated, but Professor Roberts, have I done you justice?
It's justice, but it's okay. But in fact, it's been updated. You had talked about our 2009 report. In our 2015 report, we were the 10th largest nation. So it's the same ballpark. The notion that I started the curriculum is not exactly right. I started the program entirely. There was no program in entrepreneurship at MIT. We, in fact, had one little course called New Enterprises that was started in 1961 by an MIT alum, successful entrepreneur who had retired from his activity and came in and volunteered to the dean to go teach a course in entrepreneurship. That was Dick Morse. He founded National Research Corporation, which was starting and building companies from science and technology, which is what they were doing. The most famous of which was what they came up with because of low temperature physics. And what they came up with was the ability to take various forms of liquids and turn them into major kinds of stuff. The most significant stuff was called orange juice. It was called Minute Maid orange juice. So orange juice was at about 100 million in revenues when they sold it to Coca-Cola. So those of you who know the Minute Maid division of Coca-Cola, that was started in the building that is now the Sloan School's major teaching building. It's across the street from the Sloan building itself, now the Wang building. And the front office of that on Memorial Drive was where National Research Corporation existed, which was the home of Minute Maid orange juice. But Dick Morse was the one who started the first course. He taught New Enterprises for a few years, taken over and the like, but there was no program. I came along as a second-year assistant professor in 1963 and started studying MIT spin-off companies as research to look at what was happening with people who left MIT labs to start companies. That grew, and we really started studying entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship, every aspect of the entrepreneurial markets and marketplace, funding, you name it. We began doing that over a 20-year period of time with essentially no additional courses. And in 1990, I persuaded the dean of the Sloan School, Lester Thoreau then, that we should create an entrepreneurship center. And it was explicitly because of what you said, namely, I wanted us to be doing much more than having me and some grad students studying and having one nice but lame small course that we were teaching. And he finally agreed, and we began in 1990 the MIT Entrepreneurship Center across all of MIT. That was part of my goal, that we cover all of MIT, not just the management school. And we began hiring faculty and building courses and the like. Today, in the current year, we probably have around 60 subjects throughout MIT that are parts of an entrepreneurship curriculum. It's now MIT-wide. We have significant participation by faculty in engineering. The primary class teaching is being done by management school faculties. And you did understate the role of entrepreneurship within the Sloan School, because while there may very well be 5 different elements of the school, I don't know what they may be, If you talk to the head of admissions at Sloan, he would tell you that more than a majority of our applicants explicitly say they're applying to come to Sloan in order to be able to participate in entrepreneurship at MIT. And in fact, we have 3 tracks in the Sloan School. We have a track in entrepreneurship and innovation, a track in finance, practice of finance, and we have a track that's really an operations track. It's called enterprise management, aimed at large companies and consultants, and students don't have to track. Well, approximately in the first year, they sign up, those who wish sign up for tracks. We get, in the entrepreneurship and innovation track, 120 students out of the 400 students admitted to Sloan. We also have a wait list. None of the other 2 tracks have had more than 60 students enrolled in them. And we are and maintain 30% of the students at Sloan focusing, not just taking a course, but focusing upon entrepreneurship. So it's a biggie for us. And we really love that so many students are contributing to what we're doing and taking advantage of what we're trying to accomplish.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for getting these programs into the successful place they are now. And speaking more generally, you have had the opportunity over the course of all these years to be around many of the successful startups that have come through MIT. And this is one of the reasons we were very interested in talking with you today. We, on these live video interviews, we like to focus on hearing stories from people who have themselves been successful or been around many successful people about the hacks, the tricks, the tips that they can glean that people can readily apply to their day-to-day life. So, I would ask you, having been around the 10th largest country in the world's worth of GDP, are there traits among some of the successful founders or some of the companies you advised, invested in, or worked with, which you might be able to distill and present to a wide audience?
That's a great question. Let me first give you some bases for experience. I've probably co-founded a dozen companies. I've been on the boards of about 25 companies, and I've invested in maybe 125 startups. And my usual investment is I may very well be the first investor in the company, or certainly in the angel round. And if I'm late to that, then I almost never invest first past Series A round. So I'm in at the very earliest stages of a lot of companies. Certainly some of these had been my students. I never invest in students. It's a conflict from my viewpoint to do that. But I certainly invest in alumni. And I've been fortunate to have selected people to invest in. And that's a part of the answer to your question, which is, what is it that you see in someone that causes you to want to become an investor in a brand new enterprise where they haven't proven anything about what they're going to do? They only have aspirations. And I would say there's a number of things. First, I've been at MIT my whole life. I was there as a freshman and I've never left MIT. So this is a long life. Because of that, I really tend not to tolerate people who aren't terribly smart. And everyone that I see is terribly smart. And that's a sort of a first requirement for me, because my alternative is, why in the world should I invest in somebody who isn't, from the outset, a really smart person? So I invest in smart people. That means that they have ideas. The ideas are their own. They may have formed them in many different ways, but they've got ideas and they're able to think about their ideas, and they're able, in fact, to think about whatever it is they're going to come up with in life. So being smart is a starting point. Number two, being highly motivated. From my experience with entrepreneurship over an extended period of time, I know that it's the exceptional entrepreneur who is not going to be killing himself over an extended period of time to build that company. If someone does not have drive and motivation of an extraordinary nature from the beginning, they will fail. They will drop out. they will not be able to cope with the multiplicity of problems that they will be encountering. I warn my students of that from the outset. I tell them, if you really aren't highly dedicated to what you're wanting to do, don't bother. Wait till something comes along that you really want to achieve and want to accomplish and willing to dedicate yourself to. So that's a second important aspect of most of the entrepreneurs that I invest in, and most of the entrepreneurs that I may not have invested in, but that I see have succeeded. They're highly motivated. The third thing from my point of view, in terms of my own investment, is I know that starting and trying to building a company is a long-term proposition. I know that if I'm investing in a startup, unless I'm prepared to consider a decade, literally, unless I'm prepared to think about a 10-year period going forward of a relationship, then I'm probably being foolhardy or naive. Now, that's not to say that it's true of everybody. Certainly, some ventures start and blossom and they grow like crazy. I'll give you an example, a very recent one, PillPack. Elliot Cohen, who was my TA in my core course, Elliot formed PillPack with T.J. Parker, who was a guy coming out of Mass College of Pharmacy. PillPack was basically taking on the entire pharmacy industry. After 5 years, only 5 years, Amazon bought them last year and bought them for what was announced at the time as close to $1 billion. Now, that's a rarity. Unfortunately for me, because Elliot started the company when he was a second-year student, he was outside of my zone where I would be willing to invest. I don't invest in students. If I'm their professor, I am their professor as long as they are students. When they leave, if they come along, a lot of students come to me and they say, I'm starting this company, Professor Roberts. I'd love to have you on my board. I'd love to have you as an investor. And I say, what a great idea. It's really terrific. Come see me in 2 years. And they say, no, you don't understand. We're starting the company now. I said, no, I do understand. You don't understand. I cannot undertake that kind of a role in relationship. It would be a conflict with what is my primary role. My primary role is that I'm involved in your education. I'm your teacher, and I will not undertake anything that creates a conflict between my continuing in that role as an educator and my becoming a board member, an advisor, an investor in your firm. So come to me 2 years from now. And they say, well, okay. And very frequently, they don't come back because they've got their financing and they're on the way. That's great. So that was an Elliot Cohen situation. 5 years to $1 billion buyout? Wow. I mean, that's quite an exception. And you can find other exceptions that do very well in short periods of time. Another one that I am heavily involved with is HubSpot. HubSpot came out of 2 Sloan fellows, our mid-career program. One of them, DaMesh Shah, was my thesis student. DaMesh Shah invented all the tools and techniques that became the base of HubSpot while he was doing his thesis with me as a master's student. His thesis was, how is Web 2.0 going to alter the way by which software companies are created and built? And he learned an enormous amount about how do you attract people to get into conversations with you? How do you get people to be interested in what you're trying to push forward? How do you develop blogs? How do you place blogs? All of these were the tools that 1 year after he graduated, he and another of his classmates, Brian Halligan, started HubSpot. Well, HubSpot is now 8 years old. HubSpot is a public company. HubSpot is probably valued at about $8 billion in overall valuation as a public firm. HUBS is the stock. It's tripled in the past year or so. I was the first investor in HubSpot. Why? Because when I examined DaMesh Shah on his thesis, when he was finishing, was wonderful. I said, DaMesh, you're great. This is a phenomenal job you've done. So what are you going to do now? And he said, well, Ed, you know, I've been talking to Brian a lot. Brian had been my student too, Brian Halligan. He said, we keep discussing the possibility of starting a company. And I said, DaMesh, if you ever get around to starting a company, I would be thrilled to have an opportunity to invest in your company. And he said, well, Ed, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, you didn't hear me ask you, did you? I said, whatever you get around to doing, if you get around to doing it, I would be delighted to invest in your company. Now, understand what I was saying. I was saying that I was quite willing, under any circumstance, with whatever idea he was pushed, to invest in him because I believed in him. That's very important. And that's a key. If you can get to a point of believing in someone, then that's somebody you may want to have an association with. 3 months later, I got a call from DaMesh. He said he and Brian were across the street at One Broadway, which is a big incubator location, and they had a small office. He says, we've got the outline for a pitch deck. Can we come over and show you what we're thinking about doing? And I said, well, you know, my office is small. I don't have a good screen here or anything. Can't you get a room down there where you can show me what you want? He said, oh, sure, we can do that. I said, great, I'll be over this afternoon. We spent 2 hours going through the pitch deck. I was still their teacher. Why? Because Brian Halligan says he's never been in a pitch situation before when the person he was pitching to took more time than he did on all of the pitch deck. And I said, Brian, every one of your damn slides needed help. You were leaving things out. You had stuff in that was junk. You weren't clear on what you were doing. I said, so as far as I was concerned, I was continuing to help you do this. Well, we came to the end of this discussion, and I said, so, okay, so what are you guys doing now? And he said, well, we're trying to prepare ourselves to raise money. I said, are you ready to raise money? And he said, sure. I said, okay, I'm willing to come in. And Halligan, who's the CEO, looked at me, says, what? You're willing to come in? We don't really even have anything in terms or anything. And I said, you didn't hear me ask, did you? He said, well, no. I said, I imagine you're going to have reasonable terms because you're looking for money from a lot of people. So when you get your act together, let me know. I'll be very happy to write the first check. And I did. Well, you know, I've done that in other cases as well. But the point that I'm making is that you really also have to believe in that person and believe that you can have an extended time trust relationship with that person. You can't live with somebody, whether it's marriage or whether it's co-partnership or whether it's investor-founder relationship. You can't live with somebody for an extended period of time unless you have complete two-way trust. And unless you, as the outsider, in a sense, or as the second to come, not the first one there, as the joiner in an entity instead of the founder of the entity, unless you have a sense that you can trust this person and that you can develop a working relationship that is based on openness, you shouldn't enter into that kind of relationship. And that goes for every one of the kinds of things I'm talking about. So those are my preludes, namely, you're smart, which says you're capable of coming up with an idea. You're dedicated and highly motivated, so you're going to last through the crises you're going to run into. And from my point of view, we can build a long-term sustaining relationship together. Now, once that's preamble, then we can worry about the substance. What is this particular idea you're working on? Does it make sense? Well, one of the things that I've also learned is that very few companies start with the idea that they end up with. The notion of multiple pivots characterizes the vast number of companies that get underway. What's a pivot? A pivot is you suddenly realize the product or the market or the key people you're dependent on are wrong. And you've got to make a substantial change. You pivot from where you were to someplace else. Sometimes you may say, well, it's a minor adjustment. Okay, fine, it's a minor adjustment. Sometimes it's a very major adjustment. In the case of HubSpot, when they were still grad students in the entrepreneurship program, they entered the MIT 100K business plan competition. They entered it with a company they called LegalSpot. LegalSpot was going to do all kinds of inbound marketing things for lawyers. They were going to try to attract lawyers and service lawyers with software. They thought that was a great idea. That lasted about a month after the 100K. They didn't do badly. They got into the finals. They didn't win. But it caused them, the criticism they received caused them to realize this was really not a market that they knew well, and it wasn't a big enough market. So they dropped that idea. Okay, they went to a next idea. The next idea related to what DaMesh had done his thesis on. It was, how is Web 2.0 going to alter how software companies are going to get started? And he realized that some companies are going to get started by aggregating software from all over the world, created by multiple creators and integrated, and the role of an integration firm in pulling together pieces might be a great thing to do, which Web 2.0 was going to let them do. So they came up with a Web 2.0 version. They were going to service software companies. They were going to provide software companies with every piece of software tool they needed. They were going to have a finance app. They were going to have a personnel app. They were going to have whatever, a marketing thing. They were going to have all the tools you would needed to be getting going and to operate as a company. I shut that off, sorry.
No problem. No, this is just as a quick...
This is the kind of thing that I think needs to be taken into account. That you listen to an idea, if the idea is not quite right, you got to keep persisting on trying to get to the point of having an idea that's right, and then realizing you're probably going to change your mind several more times during at least the first few months or first few years.
You're a popular man this morning.
Okay, I have to get rid of this, and now I got to get rid of all of the calls. So
yeah. While you futz with that, I'll give a brief aside, which is that one of the amazing things for me about the entrepreneurship community at MIT was this network of successful people. I had the opportunity to work with DaMesh. I had the opportunity to take Brian's class, where he did a lot of work on evaluating ideas in target markets, which I'm sure came out of a lot of the experience we're talking about here, and even shared an office with Elliot Cohen of PillPack at the MIT Beehive Cooperative. So it's a very tight-knit and very strong and very powerful and incredible community, no doubt.
So you had a lot of very good experiences, both in the classes as well as in the partners and the people that you work with, which is certainly one of the important things that we try to encourage.
Absolutely. So it would seem that of the three criteria that you identified, I would say that, or would it be fair to say that two of them are things that people can actively cultivate? You might not be able to do too much about your smarts. You have a certain maybe wattage that you can adjust within maybe plus minus 10%. But would you say that motivation and cultivating long-term trust are things that people can actually work on in their individual life and improve on?
I think with difficulty. I think some of it is innate. Are you innately open? Are you the kind of person who can handle criticism? Are you the kind of person that is willing to present to someone else who you really are? And are you willing to share the difficulties that you have? In my teaching of entrepreneurship, the hardest class that I try to teach and usually fail is when I'm trying to align a number of people as guests to come in and talk about failure. I have learned that it's almost an impossibility if I define the purpose of the class as to discuss failure. If I say, we really want to focus on problems that you have had, especially if you've overcome them, then I can get almost every entrepreneur willing to sign up for that. They'll come in because they've all had problems. And if they've overcome them, they're willing to discuss what it is that I learned in the overcoming. It's a very important learning opportunity. If you failed, really failed, and didn't recover from that failure, it's very hard for you to be open about what it is that took place in the life. So I don't know that you can gear yourself or change yourself to be sufficiently comfortable with facing difficulties and talking to other people about it. I think there's a lot of people who just can't get past that point. If you can't, then you're not going to be very successful in generating an open relationship. To me, that's critical for long-term relationships. It's not critical for short-term. Short-term, you can fake your way through any kind of short-term anything. And any kind of short-term encounter, including a job interview or what, you can fake your way through if that's what you want. But you can't fake your way through an extended relationship, whether it's in a job or in a marriage or what have you. It just, all of you has to come out at some point in time. And that's really critical. So I'm not sure that if it isn't you, you can become that person. Now go talk about motivation. Can you be someone who becomes highly motivated? The psychologists would say no, because they would tell you that there's testing mechanisms. There's an old test that I used to use in some of the early studies I did of entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs called the Kepner-Trago test. The Kepner-Trago test is a test that goes after attributes of the individual. Well, one of the attributes of the individual that it tests for is your need for achievement, namely your need to achieve. That's a measure of how much inward motivation do you have to become successful. In studies that I did of people who left Lincoln Laboratory, MIT's biggest lab, controlled by people who stayed at Lincoln Lab, making the assumption that the people who left, the ones who left to become entrepreneurs, I wanted to see, could I distinguish them? One of the key differences was that the people who left had much higher scores of need for achievement. The ones who stayed had lower scores of need for achievement. That's not to say they didn't achieve. They achieved in different ways, but they didn't achieve by having to drive themselves, overcoming lots of obstacles to achieve, which is what you do when you go and try to start a company. You don't necessarily do that inside a large organization. If you try to be an internal entrepreneur inside an organization, if you're trying to make something different happen in a large firm, you had better be highly motivated and high need for achievement, because you're going to find, in my judgment, even tougher obstacles internal to the firm than you will encounter if you were outside trying to start a company. One measure of that is inside a firm, there is seldom more than one channel for financing a venture or financing an idea. Only one channel. It has to go up through a mechanism in which approval takes place. Outside, there's infinite channels. Everyone you go to is a channel. Every VC is another person where you have an opportunity to be turned down. And if you're turned down by 5 or 10, there's still some more you can go to. So the outside market has more flexibility than the inside market does, but you can be trying to achieve inside, and more power to you for you to have need for achievement. But statistically, the ones who leave and quit to set up a company on the outside, my finding is they have much higher achievement, goal-oriented aspects than the ones who stay on in their repetitive job. So again, it questions whether you can make yourself that way. I do not know. Are you born that way? Are you educated that way? Are you experientially transformed that way? I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody knows what makes you get to the point of high need for achievement, but your self-assessment ought to be something that considers it. We start with 120 students out of 400 students every year in our entrepreneurship and innovation track. A bunch of them don't drop out of the class, but they drop out of the track, because the track is asking them to continue for 2 years with a lot of additional classes, with projects, they have to enter the 100K competition or something like that. There's a lot of stuff they have to do. By the end of 2 years, a minority of that 120 have survived. Are the ones who dropped out bad people? No, not at all. Some of them concluded they didn't need all of that stuff. They could do it on their own without all the courses. They spend more time starting their own company without going to the classes, without going to all the classes, without doing all the projects. So some of them are certainly motivated and as entrepreneurial as the ones who last. Others say, hey, you're not talking about me. You're not describing me. I'm not the kind of person that can handle all of that time period of commitment to making something happen. I'm not the kind of person who can last through one after another major difficulty and still stick with it. That's not me. So I'm not the one to do that. Now, we have a different category that's kind of in the middle. We call them joiners, a category of people who say, I really am intrigued by entrepreneurship. I don't think I have the skills to start a company. That's very different. I may have the motivation, I may have ideas, but I don't think I know enough. So what do I decide for myself? I decide, hey, I'd like to join an early stage company that somebody else is running. I'd like to learn while that's a little company and see what's going on. I'd like to give myself a chance of testing me. How do I feel about what's going on around me with all of this change and all of the striving and the problems and the pivots? Am I comfortable in that environment? Maybe I can get myself to the point where I feel comfortable in going out on my own and joining with others. By the way, that's another critical thing, joining with others to found a company. Our data is very clear. If you try to start a company on your own, you're a fool. You ought to start companies with co-founders. The co-founders ought to be complementary to you in skills and attitudes and the like, but you better have shared trust and shared values and shared commitment to what it is in common you're attempting to undertake. So, I mean, we've learned a lot from our research. We've learned a lot from the experience that we've had with our own students. I've learned a lot from the experience I've had on boards of companies I've started or companies I've helped guide and the like. And they all come together. From my perspective, my first stuff as a grad student at MIT, I worked for Jay Forrester in system dynamics. So I learned a lot about feedback systems and how feedback systems can be used to interpret complexity in the world and maybe help give you new insights. To me, the feedback from gaining experience on what you're going to do next is very important. This is one of the reasons why in 1990, when I wrote a proposal for an entrepreneurship center, I said, number one, it's got to be all across MIT, not just limited to the business school. Number two, it's got to be encouraging technical people and management people to be coming together in co-founder relationships. Our research showed that. And in terms of the issue of your skill sets, we wanted to combine academic inputs with practitioner inputs. So we have and you experienced it, we have a large number of classes where the practitioners are the dominant faculty. And fortunately, we have some classes that are co-taught, where we have a practitioner and academic standing beside each other in front of the class, sometimes arguing with each other, sometimes agreeing with each other, from different backgrounds, coming to the point of what it is they're trying to share with the students. I personally think that our students benefit best when they have both sorts of inputs, not just academic. I'm an academician. I'm also a practitioner. And sometimes I think the students aren't necessarily happy when I talk like a practitioner. They think that they're supposed to own that turf. But I've had a hell of a lot of years of being more than an academician, being a practitioner of entrepreneurship. So sometimes to say don't come from a book or data. It comes from the fact that I experienced this kind of a company or that kind of a person or that kind of a competitive situation or that kind of a legal problem or that kind of a financing situation. And it didn't come out of any course. So, those things are important as well. What else? What else do you want to ask me that I haven't overly answered?
Oh, there's no doubt a lot of questions I have. I guess one of the points that came up from what you were just discussing just now would be the concept of failure, which I think is really interesting. And would you say that it would be a very useful life skill for a young person to learn, which they could do, even if they were in high school or college, to throw themselves into situations and become comfortable with the concept of how can they fail?
Yesterday, the principal area in our entrepreneurship program where I would say we have so far failed is in increasing the number of women who are becoming entrepreneurs at MIT. There's a 3-to-1 ratio between the male percentage and the female MIT alumni, male versus female, in who becomes entrepreneurs. So I regard that it's a failure so far. We're still working on how do we get more women involved. I have, my wife and I have a common friend who is really dedicated to the MIT Venture Mentoring Service, which is a very good counseling organization. And she is the one I often talk to about female entrepreneurs. Yesterday, she sent me an article to read. And the article was about a woman who founded Spanx. Spanx is the garment stuff that's undergarments, and you could wear it under, a woman could wear it under a tight dress and you wouldn't notice her panties because they really are form-fitting things, and it's a billion-dollar company now. The thrust of the article, it was biographical by her. The thrust of the article was how her father caused her and her brother to try to experience failure as young people. And she kept feeling resentment towards the fact that he kept saying it's okay to fail. And she thought that he really wanted them to fail. And she said it took until she was in her 20s before she realized that he wanted them to experience what failure was like so that you could overcome it. And she talks in this article, this interview-based article, about the low points of her life where she thought there was no tomorrow. And then she came up with this idea about Spanx. And inside of a very short period of time, she was raising money like crazy, building a huge organization, and became a quick unicorn. And now the company is valued well over $1 billion and doing wonderfully. And so she can now talk about having overcome, having learned to fail, and having learned that you can get past it. Now, we don't do that to our students. Maybe we should. We don't push them into situations where they will fail. We challenge them, but maybe we would be better off if we in fact did that somehow. I don't know how do you induce failure without inducing permanent damage? I don't know the answer to that. I'll give you a postulate which relates to this, not failure exactly, but similar challenge in trying to overcome the challenge. I led a group of 10 MIT faculty 2 years ago to do a study tour of entrepreneurship and innovation in Israel. And one part of the study tour was we met with the leadership, the military leadership, of the most highly regarded intelligence group in the Israeli military. They go by numbers. This is the 8200 group. 8200 is world-renowned as a leading military organization in intelligence. And we spent an afternoon with the colonel and the generals and what have you of that organization talking about how come so many startups in Israel come out of your organization and other elite military organizations. And he said that they've had lots of visitors. The visitors always want to know how do they develop their new intelligence stuff and the like. He said, you're the first one that wants to know how do we develop entrepreneurs. He said, because we don't do it consciously, but we do it. We know we do it. And one of the things that he said, we were about trying to figure out what lessons can we learn to take back to MIT. He said, number one, We have the cream of the crop. Everybody in Israel has to go through 2 years in the IDF, and we have first choice. Well, we can't do that at MIT. We got pretty good choices, but we can't have first choice. There are a lot of other places like Stanford and Caltech and even Harvard once in a while that get the share in first choice. But we got good enough choice. So that was one thing we can't do. But the second thing he said is that the first thing that we do is we assign our new employees, first assignment is out in the field with the operating units. And we thought about that, and he said, we believe that nobody can come up with appropriate ideas of new products, new systems, and new tools if they haven't experienced the operational issues of the people they are serving. And he said, and he laughed, he said, this is kind of market research. And it's their first assignment when they come to work for us. They go into an intelligence unit, and the first job is get out of our place, go to work in some place where you're going to see what your customer is doing and what your eventual customer may want from you. And that was interesting. We said, that's interesting. Could we do that in a business school? Well, maybe, but it's hard to go send them out and put them into the jeopardy of it. The third thing he said is we teach them not to accept downward orders without question. Now, a downward order becomes the basis for challenge. And he told a bunch of stories about young people within their unit who were raising questions about what the rules and regulations were, what they were doing, and they were being encouraged to take it to a higher level. You do it. And they would say, well, I'm just a newbie and I don't know anything. And they would say, no. This is your idea. Now go talk to such and such, 2 levels above you. And, can I do that? And they're in panic. And the environment that they have created is an environment in which it's okay to raise challenge. Now, if it's okay to raise challenge, it's okay to be turned down as well, because you didn't think that it was something legitimate for you in the first place. But you also are going to occasionally experience success. And you're going to be stimulated that, hey, not only is it okay to take on challenge, I may get someplace by taking on challenge. And while I might fail, I might succeed. And I think if you transform the notion that possible failure must be failure to possible failure could be success. And it's okay if you fail, but don't be afraid to try again, because the next one could lead to success. I don't know how you can run an organization in such a way as to cause large numbers of the people in your organization to feel that way. I think if you could do that, it would be wonderful. Now, I do have ideas about what makes for effective leadership, and it relates to that in part. Number one, a leader ought to personally have very high need for achievement. The leader should be highly motivated to achieve. Number two, the leader, 3 dimensions in the Kepner-Trago test that are measured: achievement motivation, power motivation, and affiliation motivation. With respect to power, our research says that if you have a high need for power, you stifle the subordinates in your organization. If you have low need for power, you give them no leadership and no guidance. What you need is you need moderate need for power. You need to want enough control that you're willing to focus on the goals and objectives of the organization without relent, and yet you're going to push for the goals and objectives of the organization that are your missions. But beyond that, the tactics of how you're going to get there, you're willing to push down to subordinates in the organization and empower them. An organization that has a sharing of power, goal-focused at the top, distributed below, so that everybody, in a way, has a piece of the power-seeking, power-exercising authority of an organization, I think that leads to motivating a very large number of people to say, hey, I own a piece of this, it's my goal, and I'm willing to kill myself to get this piece done.
Right.
The overall. Now, the last one, need for affiliation. Do you need to be somebody who is touchy-feely, who is really liking to work with well, communication is better that way. Do you need to be that way? We ended up finding no correlation between whether you did or you didn't like affiliative relationships with everybody that you're working with on a flat level and any kind of measure of success of the organization. I don't know what that says. Tom Allen, my esteemed colleague who focused on technical communication, found that when you had more friendship among people, you had more technical communication, you had faster technical problem solving. I assume it might apply to business problem solving as well, but I don't know that anybody's done that study yet. So
this is fascinating. I probably have time for maybe one more question. I want to be respectful of your time. You have many companies you have to go out and invest in, no doubt. But one of the
work on the second edition of the book I'm writing. So,
oh, excellent.
Right.
We'll definitely give you a chance to plug that in a second. I wanted to ask about maybe a potential conflict between some of these things. On the one hand, if you have people who are, willing to embrace or put themselves in situations where they might fail, if they're also, as you identify, very achievement-oriented, then it might seem that they might not be able or willing to, so-called cut their losses or kind of accept that they might have to pivot their idea. So, what's your comment or expertise on that role of what happens when achievement-oriented people run up against failure? And, is it best for them to push through, or when should they say something's not working, we need to change?
Well, I think you've answered your own question because I think that the issue is if something's wrong and they aren't able to see their way clear to get through to success, then the issue is clearly they need to change. And if they're willing to accept the change, too bad, the organization's going to fail. But that's what you defined already. You laid the groundwork by saying, hey, if they encounter a problem and they can't push through to resolving the problem, what should they do? And the answer is pivot, that is, come up with an alternative idea, or come up with an alternative person to run through this idea that you're not able to handle, or quit. Now, how much do you quit? Do you quit the idea? If so, then it's open maybe to a different idea. Do you quit the specific role? If so, there's other things you could do. Not all founder CEOs ought to be founder CEOs or ought to be continuing CEOs. They have founder CEOs. Very frequently, they go on to being something else. They can be merely an important technical contributor to the company going forward. That frequently happens. It happens easiest when the person understands his or her own limitations and says, hey, I was great to get this off the ground. I don't know how to move forward. I'll give you an example of a company I did invest in, but I invested in late because my son was a buddy of this guy. The company is called Toast. And whether you know it or not by name, Toast is the most rapidly growing company in the field of restaurant information systems. The stuff that increasingly you are typing your order into or getting your bill from or supplying the company with information about what's going on. Toast is a very broad-based thing. Toast is growing like crazy. The founders of Toast were 4 MIT software guys, mostly software guys. They were mechanical engineers, and they were going to do this thing, this company and the like. And they started moving ahead, and the more they moved ahead, the more they realized that the problem they were trying to solve wasn't the right problem. They were working on the restaurants, they were working on systems, but they realized that they didn't have it right. They went back to their old CEO in a prior company for whom they had worked, and they liked him, and they enjoyed working for him, and they recruited their former boss to come over and become the CEO of their company. This guy was not a founder. He came in 2 years after the company was founded, brought there by the common agreement of 4 co-founders that they needed somebody with a different set of skills than they to move the company forward. Then the company is now astonishing. The company's now having, I think its current valuation of its latest round is $2.5 billion. So they're going like crazy, and they've been doing wonderful in the market and the like. Now, there's a case where a group, not just a single one of them was CEO. In fact, I've invited that CEO to come to my class later this semester to talk about overcoming problems during the growth stages of the firm. So I asked the founder CEO to come in and to talk not just about what he did, but what did everybody do in the group, including the new CEO, and how did they reach the decision to bring in an outsider. So that's what I prepped him for, that I want him to talk about when he comes to my class in this. But how does a group of 4 co-founders who are buddies, who have worked together closely, come to the point of a common agreement that says we can't do it, and we need to bring somebody else in who can lead us better than we can do it, and then go out and convince somebody in another organization who's being very successful in another organization to quit that organization where he's already successful, come to this early stage firm, take it over and run it up and be successful. I mean, I think that takes certainly a lot of guts on the part of people, and it's a special characteristic where you're willing to admit that our failure is a limitation of us. It's not necessarily a limitation of the opportunity. And if we had somebody else with us, we might be able to seize the opportunity. So it's that
ties back.
That's not something that you can code and say, here's the formula for doing it.
And it ties back to your point about picking good technical co-founding team to have with you. So, this has been absolutely fascinating. With the time we have left, would you feel free to offer kind of any parting advice, including the details about your new book?
Well, the new I'll tell you about the new book and whether it has advice or not. It has some advice. The book is called Celebrating Entrepreneurs: Celebrating Entrepreneurs: A Half Century of MIT's Growth and Impact. What it is the story of what MIT did over a 50-year period of time of growing a very large program of many organizations. We have a lot of different contributors, not just the Entrepreneurship Center that I started in our courses, but a lot of other contributors to this. And in November 2016, we had a celebration of essentially 50 years. It wasn't quite 50 years. It was actually a few more than that. We did this, and I put together a coffee table book that's very impressive and very heavy and is beautifully bound and the like. And MIT's done this on a few times. We privately printed it, and we gave it away. And we gave it away to those people who came to this great celebration, several hundred people, those people who are described in the book. And the people described in the book, there's 2 parts of the book. The first half is the history of building entrepreneurship at MIT in over 50 years to the present. The second half takes 4 industries and goes in depth into those 4 industries in which the pioneering was done by MIT alumni. And we talk about the industries and those companies in depth, and we have all of those entrepreneurs talking about what they did and what problems they overcame and what was critical in building the industries. And the industries are very varied. The first one's biotech, second one's the internet, the third is from CAD/CAM to robotics, and the fourth is modern finance, modern tools of modern finance. So these are very different industries, and I'm focusing on MIT people who built great companies. So there's a lot of stuff of lessons from at least those 4 industries. So that's the book. But the book was limited in its distribution. So what I decided to do, is to produce a second edition. I'm going to cut back on some of the heavy parts of describing the inside aspects of what went on at MIT, because there's too much detail particularly for a non-MIT person to read. And I'm updating all of the materials of the 4 chapters on companies. So that we're going to have the latest word of all these companies and all the various things that have been done. And we're going to make it available on Kindle and in paperback from Amazon, maybe from Apple. We haven't yet decided that. And there probably won't be a hardcover version of the book, although we're still open to that. I don't know. And I would say that the book, I'm basically almost done with the rewriting. So the book could be out it certainly could be out before the end of the year. And it'll have the same name. So should you see something on Amazon or what have you that says Celebrating Entrepreneurs, and it will still probably have the second title unless they talk me out of it, the second half saying a half century of MIT's growth and impact, it may have lessons for entrepreneurs as well. It will have a lot of lessons for academics worldwide that are trying to build entrepreneurship programs. And it will have a lot of lessons for urban economic developers who are trying to build entrepreneurial regions. And whether you know it or not, that's taking place worldwide. The rest of the world is trying to copy America, and in particular, they're trying to copy Cambridge and Silicon Valley and few places, and there isn't a guidebook for them. Well, frankly, the first half of the book is as close to a guidebook that they are going to find as to what sorts of things have been done that succeeded someplace. And it's not that they should copy us. It's that they should consider these things and say, how might we do something comparable but different and fitting our circumstances? And in much of the book, we talk about our experiences in going overseas, our being all of the pieces of the MIT organizations that have reached out to create overseas activities in Europe, in Africa, in Asia. So there's a lot of examples of how we've done help in transforming other kinds of situations. There's no situation that is exactly like ours. We're not exactly like Silicon Valley. Stanford is our closest replica, but Stanford and MIT are not the same place. They're different places. And we're both very successful. The Stanford numbers are like the MIT numbers in terms of creation of people and percentage of, how big a world economy they are. They're about the same size as we are in terms of 10th largest. Our biggest competitor as for 10th probably is Stanford. It's not Russia or India. But there aren't a lot of places that have been successful in growing a very complicated system of nurturing entrepreneurs and bringing them to the point of becoming successful and having impact. So if anything, there's as many people who could benefit in terms of economic development and growing their own cities, regions, and countries as could learn from the lessons of the entrepreneurs, the second half of the book, in founding and growing their own companies. And it might be out by the end of the year. It won't be out very much longer than that. If it's maybe it'll be out January, February, but it's almost there.
Well, thank you for making my Christmas shopping easier, potentially.
Maybe.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all the tips and advice.
You're very welcome to have them and the like. One of my sins is that I am always too free in words and time consumption in providing advice. I think it comes from being a dedicated, highly motivated teacher. And I do enjoy, I really enjoy, my every new year of replenishment. And when a new class comes in, from my point of view, they're just a bunch of newbies that are going to bring new sources of ideas, energy, enlightenment, and fun for me. So it keeps me young, as young as I can get away with being, while being. Thank you for doing this interview.
The pleasure was mine. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.